Recently, Norwalk suffered extensive damage and flooding from storms Irene and Sandy. What should the state do to assist coastal communities to prepare for extreme weather, to prevent property damage and erosion?
The state needs to invest in our coastlines and protecting those who live along there. Those who do live along those areas do know that they are in a fragile area. We can't successfly help everyone from preventing what's going to happen. Again, nature turns around, as we had an amazing storm that came in for 20 minutes during our Oyster Festival here in Norwalk and destroyed the festival itself. So we need to look into ways that we can use nature to prevent some of this coastal flooding and some of these tragedies from happening.
The state, does have a role to help and preempt future crises like these. So, for example, on the last one, there was an issue about whether it was a tropical storm or hurricane, and it would play in terms of what the insurance companies would pay for damage. And I know the state got involved with that to make sure that it was classified as a hurricane, so that the Connecticut residents would get the proper insurance payments. Secondly, with the loss of electricity, I think all of us probably felt frustration with CLMP in terms of the seemingly slow responses and the inability to get clear answers as to, well, when are things going to get fixed? And I think there were some improvements made. There was a big map of Connecticut broken out by town, and with different color codings, based on how much was done. But I think the communication really needs to be enhanced, and also so that residents feel more of a confidence that electricity is going to be brought back on more quickly. The other thing is with the trees. I know the state has had some pretty lenient guidelines with tree branches near the power lines, and I think there's been involved a program to do some preemptive pruning so that in the future not so many lines get knocked down.
What solutions do you propose to solve the issue of affordable housing in our area?
We have the state statute that requires at least 10% affordable housing, and I'm pleased. I think we're all pleased that Norwalk has certainly done its share. Our share of affordable housing stock has been above 10%, and it certainly protects us from the negative consequences of that statute, where towns that fall below that 10% threshold, then if new developers can come in and they want to put in affordable housing, in effect they could basically do spot zoning, which can destroy the integrity of neighborhoods. And Norwalk, we're a working middle-class community, and so it makes sense that we have a commitment to affordable housing. When I was with the Human Services Council, we were involved with affordable housing on Fair Street, and it was a project certainly that it got built and it got done, thankfully. There were some financial hiccups there, but it got done. So at the end of the day, we're a community where working and middle-class people live. And when people talk about affordable housing, in some people's minds they think, oh, it's Section 8, or it's really not that at all. It's really, again, working and middle-class people where this housing applies to. And so I'm a defender of that statute. And I certainly wouldn't want to see that watered down.
I think we need to be more diligent, not only in our city but in our state, to the developers that take on projects with affordable housing. We've had many who've come to us and have said, well, it's not going to work into our plan that we have this many units of affordable housing, we'd like to go off-site. We can't do that. We have to hold ourselves accountable to the laws and regulations that are in place and make sure that we hold these developers to the fire. On my time in the Human Relations Committee for the Commission for the City of Norwalk, we had several cases where folks were denied some access to affordable housing, and we did have trials that were held within the City of Norwalk to uphold what these folks should have had. And again, as my opponent said, that this is not just Section 8 housing. These are veterans that gave their service to this country that need affordable housing. These are handicap that need handicap accessible houses. We do have to be diligent that we have a portion of our community that needs this same attention at all times, and we cannot turn our back on that.
How will you balance the need to fund incentives to retain businesses in Connecticut versus attracting new businesses to start up or relocate to Connecticut?
Attracting businesses and retaining businesses is pretty much in the same ballpark. A lot of this has to do, especially down here in Fairfield County, a lot of this has to do with traffic congestion and how we attract businesses to this area. There are laws and regulations, and sometimes the state passes these laws, and we don't think about the consequences about the zoning that we have set up for some of these larger corporations or warehouses and how they will affect our traffic. I believe that we need to balance our funding by the Small Business Express program, which has been set up now, and giving small loans and incentives to small companies to stay in Connecticut and also to thrive in Connecticut and to start up as well. This is a program that was started by this administration because banks at some point were not giving out we're not funding companies to stay here or to work, and it was during the recession when the banks were not funding these, and the government had to set up a way to help fund and contain jobs here in the state. So I believe that we have a formula already in progress that's been working. We need to continually stay out there and communicate with the small businesses, and I think that's another thing with the Commission on Economic and Community Development, that we need to have a lot more communication with the small businesses to outreach to them and show them where the resources are in the state that can help them.
I work with small businesses every day. I'm a senior vice president at Webster Bank, and that's what I do. I work with small businesses in Norwalk and New Canaan and Stamford and Darien and Greenwich and Westport. I have to tell you, they don't feel like they're getting a lot of wind behind their back. A lot of small businesses feel like they're sort of just they exist to just pay revenue to the state. What we need to do is we need to start treating small businesses as a partner, because they're the ones that create the jobs. And so that means lowering the tax rates. It means lowering the regulations and burden. Massachusetts and New York just lowered their business taxes. And I do support the Small Business Express program. That was a bipartisan jobs bill that went out, and I've seen the benefits of that. What I don't support is what I would call corporate welfare, where we're basically dishing out big checks to big corporations.
Connecticut has the second highest per capita debt in the United States. How are you going to approach the question of dealing with this situation?
Our total liabilities are at least $70 billion. There's about $20 billion of bonded debt, and then about $50 billion of debt related to pensions and OPEB, post-retirement liabilities. What we need to do is what we did here in Norwalk. When I chaired the Board of Estimate for the last 8 years, I was part of a process that got involved with renegotiating the city union contracts. And what we did was, for all new hires, that as of last year, June 30th, new hires for the city of Norwalk, they have to go on to 401k style pension plans. They have to get involved with HSA high deductible medical accounts, basically what the rest of the private sector has. And also, there's no further post-retirement liability. They get a stipend. Existing workers, their contracts are honored. They have to kick in more, but basically they've been grandfathered. But at the end of the day, government's kind of like a super tanker. You're in the captain's area and you turn the wheel and the ship doesn't turn. Then you keep turning the wheel, and then after a while it starts turning, and then you turn it some more, and hey, it finally starts turning. That's what we need to do here. And if we do in the state what we did in Norwalk, these unfunded liabilities on the pension and the OPEB, we'll start to see those being addressed. Because if new workers don't create those liabilities, if you're on a 401k style plan, you have no gap in your pension, because you take the risk of the market, not the taxpayers. So if we take that kind of step where it's fair to everyone, but it just realigns things with the private sector, we can really start addressing this issue. There
There are liabilities that the state has and funding that we do have out there, and we do have to keep our eye on that at all times. There are capital projects that are coming up to the state. The state's been neglected for many decades, especially in infrastructure. These are projects that we cannot afford to do, and we do have to go out to bonding. Bonding and loans are what keep us going. We have to keep that in check, but at the same time, you take the walk bridge here in Norwalk that needs to be completed, that needs to be revamped. It's a 115-year-old technology, and we rely on the 150-year-old technology that goes over it to get us place to place. But Our liability to fund these projects and move forward is the responsibility of our legislature to do so. But again, we do have to keep that in check. We have to know at all times where our limits are and how far we can go. Corporate America has learned this process, and we should be partnering with corporations to learn the process on how they balance their liability and funding and loans.
For many years, Norwalk Republican and Democratic representatives have tried unsuccessfully to get the educational cost-sharing formula changed to attain equity for Norwalk. What do you see as your role in improving educational funding for Norwalk?
I don't believe that the ECS funding is going to be solved in the near future. It's a debate that's going to be across the state constantly, and there is really no solution at the table right now. What we need to focus on is our education system and how it works. And I believe wholeheartedly in universal pre-K and in early childhood education to nip the bud of our education problems. I think that's going to affect our test scores. I think it's going to affect how the children matriculate through the system. If we have children that are prepared to go into kindergarten, who know how to read, who know how to socialize, who know the ins and outs of basic knowledge of education process, I believe that's where we're going to succeed in closing the achievement gap. And I think that the money that we do spend on education needs to be monitored more closely. Are we getting the services that we pay for? And I think that comes down to talking with teachers and administrators at the same time, and those at the state level in the education process, and also partnering with the colleges and universities that we have in the state, and formulating a better education process and keeping our eyes on the wheel at all times.
All the towns and cities in Connecticut, we're the 6th largest, and we're literally almost at the bottom in terms of our pro rata share. And if the magnitude of how bad it is if we all agree to cut a deal instead of saying, look, move us from like the bottom to number 6, which is what we rank at, but make us like number 80, we'll just sort of compromise and just be in the middle. We get an extra $40–45 million a year, every year. And that's just astounding. I mean, the city has a total budget of about $310 million, so we're talking about a massive increase of funding. And so what we have is, if you've ever wondered, why does it seem like we pay so much in taxes but we don't get so much out of education? That's why. That's what's missing. What I can promise is that I will do my best to look for pockets of money, look for areas where we can bring more in. I'm very good at working with people, forming coalitions. If we have to cut some deals, that's fine. I'm capable of doing that as well, but looking for ways to bring more money in.
What is your position on the ballot question permitting the legislature to discuss revising election procedures, including possible early voting?
I'm going to vote no on it. Well, first of all, the way I read the question is the legislature can do whatever it wants. I mean, so they can make the laws more restrictive, they can make them less restrictive, they could, I don't know, apparently it almost sounds like a blank check. And I don't know if I feel comfortable just handing a blank check over to someone on an important issue like voting in elections. I do have concerns about fraud.
In Oregon, they have a 90% turnout of voters there because they send out ballots to everyone 4 weeks ahead. There's early voting. It is done. In any case, there's voter fraud that could happen in anywhere somebody wants to circumvent a system. They're going to try to do that. But we have checks and balances. We have registrar of voters. We have town clerks. They do work together during the election process to double check each other's numbers, to double check their processes. Again, election laws is near and dear to my heart, and I believe that I could represent this state very well in that department, and I believe that this constitutional amendment will help all of us in the long run.
What would be your priorities for solving traffic problems in Fairfield County?
We have many projects going on in the widening and expanding the exit ramps. That's an ongoing project that, again, as I said, will be completed soon and will help ease traffic here. It worked in Stamford, it's going to work in the Norwalk area as well and help us on the commute. Our rail line, we have to stay diligent with Metro North. I believe that we need to do diligent work on our rail lines. We need to hold Metro North accountable for the work that they do. We own the rails, we own the bridges, and they run the tracks, and they run the cars, and they run the schedules. We need to have a better working relationship with them. I think we need to have light rails put into the state of Connecticut that will connect our cities, that will connect the municipalities, that will help commerce. I believe we should look at freight lines for the state of Connecticut that will bring freight in, get trucks off the road. Ports in Bridgeport, New Haven, that will help offload barges there and then have distribution centers from there. I'm not opposed to putting the toll question on the table. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It's quite inevitable that the state of Connecticut could use this revenue. With high-speed tolls now, with Easy Pass, every other state in New England has it. We pay those tolls. Traffic doesn't get backed up. Anyone who's over 40 knows how it used to be in Fairfield County especially. And we'd sit at those tolls and it became a danger zone, especially after the accident that happened in Stratford. It's not like that anymore. What we should have is a program, possibly, that we charge out-of-state vehicles, we charge out-of-state trucks, that we have discounts for residents of the state of Connecticut to go through. This is revenue that could go to pay for infrastructure to repair.
We have a disproportionately high share of tractor-trailer traffic relative to the rest of the country. When goods come into our part of the U.S., they either go into New York City, Port Elizabeth, and get unloaded onto trucks, or they have to go to the railhead in New Jersey, and then they get put on trucks. So we don't use our ports. We don't have commercial rail, so things go on trucks, and they go on I-95 since they can't go on the Merritt. And then we have to live with that. So what I would like to see happen is better use of our ports. I'm glad we now have a Connecticut Port Authority. That's great. I'd like to see the feeder barge system resurrected, so when barges pull into Port Elizabeth, we put on feeder barges, and they can go up to Bridgeport or New Haven or to London, bypassing our area, taking trucks off the road. The other areas in terms of Metro I-95, I support the interchange lanes. I supported that years ago when they came before us. I also, with the rail lines, I'd like to see the Danbury line electrified. So it's one line, like the New Canaan Spur line.
If taxes are cut or remain flat, what services would you cut and which would you sustain?
Well, first of all, I think whoever's running for office has a responsibility when they say we're going to look at the budget line by line, to actually tell you which lines they're willing to look at. And, you know, I'll pick two. The first one is, I mentioned before, is with the employee benefit costs. And Andy, you still haven't answered that question. Basically what we need to do is renegotiate the contracts with the unions. And we can do it in a way that's fair to the existing workforce, but also realigns the contracts to the private sector. And by doing that, we can really nip in the bud one of the largest cost drivers in the state budget. Second area that I'd like to focus on is what I call corporate welfare. I just don't think we should be handing out large hedge funds $115 million. I think it could be better used elsewhere.
I don't have a handle on the entire budget at this point, and I will look line by line. We do see on a daily basis as we drive either around town or around the state where there's waste. We need to know and talk to those folks that are working in the departments and the agencies where they see waste, where things are going out the door. And we need, again, I believe we have to have a compliance agency that does checks and balances across the state as to where our money's going, how it's being spent, and if it's being spent properly. I think we need to look into ways of raising revenues from outside of the state as well. I'd hate to find out that we're missing the boat on tourism, that we're not advertising that. We have a coastline that is unlike any other in the United States, and we should be attracting people to be spending money here in our state.
Taxes are too high. And I think if we raise taxes more like Governor Malloy did, we still have a deficit. If we keep raising taxes, we'll still have the problem. We need to have a handle on spending. And I have specific ways of spending that we can address that's fair and that gets the job done.